Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are. Nice to see you back. It seems today that we have a lot of questions regarding mind and consciousness. That's quite good. Everybody seems to be on the right track. The same track and the right track. Because in the Buddha Dharma, then it's taught that mind is everything. Mind is the source of everything. So it's a really fundamental and important point. And similarly, there isn't really anything we can say with any certainty about reality, the world we live in, phenomena, the universe, that is disconnected from mind. I mean, a scientist would claim that there could be a rock somewhere floating in space that no one has ever perceived or interacted with, that has not been perceived by any kind of sentient being. But even that suggestion itself only arises independent upon mind. So really it's the only thing we can say, is we don't encounter anything that's disconnected from mind. And this is a fundamental point in the Buddha Dharma. So before we start, and again, begin by fixing your motivation. Whether that be the motivation to overcome personal trauma and find peace and happiness in the mundane world, or likewise to be liberated from the mundane world, or to seek final and perfect enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. And try to remind yourself exactly why you are engaging in the spiritual path. And this is related to these three types of spiritual practitioners, three types of potential spiritual practitioners. Those that are seeking rebirth in higher realms to experience well-being in future lifetimes. Those that are searching for liberation from suffering in the mundane world, and those who seek perfect and final enlightenment. Okay, to start with, what happens to consciousness during sleep before we eventually get lost in dreams? Is there a way to practice Dharma even during sleep? Is sleep like death when everything is like zero? So this is BJ 820 asking an intelligent question. So first what we have to do is look at what we mean by consciousness. And the way consciousness is defined differs between various spiritual traditions, and it's also considered in a slightly different manner in science. In general, in science, when we talk about our being, our consciousness, that's what we refer to as mind in the Buddha Dharma. So in science, we think this quality of being a self-aware or conscious entity is what makes us a sentient being. In the Buddha Dharma, consciousness is mind. This refers to mind. What makes us a sentient being is mind. And likewise, in the Buddha Dharma, when we say consciousness, then what we're talking about are the sense perceptions and the objects that arise to the sense perceptions. So it's slightly different there. The fundamental element is mind, and then to mind arises various different conscious events, right? So we have sight, sound, smells, taste, bodily sensations, etc. And we also have mental consciousness. And then also in the Hindu tradition, then they see this consciousness to be the ultimate thing. So really the term mind in Buddhism kind of means what they call consciousness in the Hindu tradition. And we say mind in Buddhism is what they call consciousness in when it's referred to in modern science. Now in modern science, then they have had difficulties discovering what consciousness is or even defining it. And it's been a real sticking point. It's called the hard problem. That's because they can't really pin down what we mean by consciousness. We have to have some kind of reference point for ourselves. So if we just sit there for a moment and relax and just focus your attention on whatever arises, then in general, this is what we refer to as consciousness. So that's a really kind of loose definition, right? Subjectively, we'll relate to that in a different way. So in order to answer this question, then first we have to address what is called consciousness in the Buddha Dharma. So I'm hoping everybody can hear me. And so in general, we have two things. We have what we call mind and matter. So it's this spirit and body dichotomy, right? And this is classically within philosophy, then this has been addressed going right back to the ancient Greece, etc. We've considered that there's this element that is a conscious element, a mental element, and there's the physical world, and these two are separate. And of course, many scientists these days say, well, there is no separation, there is only matter. And it's by acting on the matter of the brain, then we have these kind of side effects, which are the experiences of consciousness. So traditionally, in the Buddha Dharma, from the very inception of the views, and in general there's 4 levels of views, we've got these foundational levels, then there is this mind-body split. So that's the Vaibhashikas and the Sautrantikas. That's the particularists and the sutra followers. These are the what are called lower schools of Buddha Dharma, but really they're the foundation. It's not that they're lower, it's the basis. And both of these foundational vehicles of the Buddha Dharma believe in this mind-body split, and that matter, so body or matter or form, is made up of atoms. And these are indivisible atoms, so they're quantum particles. They can't be divided. So we have to think of them as kind of one-dimensional objects. And that these are real. They're like atoms, they're real. But because all phenomena are made of these particles, that means all phenomena are kind of impermanent and fallible. They will break down eventually. And in terms of mind, then mind is said to be composed of discrete quantum time moments. So moments of consciousness, and they're discrete. They appear to us as a continuum. So we look at a river and we see that the river flows from the uphill, downhill, and we see that to be a continuum. And we perceive our consciousness to be similarly as a continuum. But what is taught in this tradition of the Hinayana or Theravada is that it's not a continuum, but it's discrete time moments, indivisible time moments. So they're quantum time moments. So matter is made out of real particles, and consciousness is made of these discrete moments of time that are one after the other. And you have to understand that they are also, as if they were a continuum, then one moment causes the next moment to arise. So one conscious moment impels the next conscious moment, which is the impelled consciousness. And it progresses like that, one moment after another. Now, again, remember, consciousness means these perceptions of forms, smells, mental perceptions, whatever it is, it's some kind of object that arises to a sense consciousness. That's what we mean by consciousness in the Buddha Dharma. And then what we understand is, when we hit deep sleep, then there are no perceptions of apparent objects. There's no observables, right? Deep sleep is not only like blackness, but there's no awareness, we say. And so the question you have is, what happens to mind then at that time? That's an important question. But it's based on the assumption that, for example, during sleep and consciousness, nothing arises to consciousness or mind, and so mind must go somewhere for that duration. But the way you have to understand how it's presented in the Buddha Dharma is that it's presented in the context of subjective experience. As I said at the beginning of this discussion, we can't really say anything other than stuff arises to our minds, right? To my mind, personally, I can't read your mind. I don't know what's going on in your mind. But I can say for certainty, yes, I do experience or I do perceive forms. I can't say if those forms are real or not, but what I can say is there's something, there isn't nothing, and that's a subjective experience, right? So then what happens when we go into sleep is we've got this moment where we're falling asleep, and it's taught that the consciousnesses dissolve into the elements. So one by one, we dissolve into the elements, and our consciousness start to shut down, and then we hit this point of deep sleep. That lasts for a certain period of time, and let's say we don't dream, make it easier, and then we wake up. So what that is taught to be is a single time moment. It's a single bardo of a consciousness. Now, if you've watched the video that I presented on the 6 bardos, then it talks about one of them, this bardo of sleep and dreams. And so all of these kind of boundaries between one moment and another are seen to be bardos. And so if you go into deep sleep, basically you're going from being slightly aware There's deep sleep, and then you wake up again. It's one moment. Now, this is important to understand because this is similar to how it is taught for beings who go into the formless realm. So, as you know, then meditators, yogis, especially in the Hindu tradition, then we cultivate this perceptionless samadhi. So that's resting in a state that is, you could say, synonymous with deep sleep. And a practitioner who develops this meditation to a very great degree becomes very stable in this. And they can, for example, in the case of Gampopa, could remain in a single samadhi for weeks. But if you read the Vedic scriptures, then there are these meditators who would stay in a single samadhi for eons, right? They would sit on top of a mountain, go into this perceptionless state, and remain there for eons, and then a god would see them and think, wow, that chap's done quite well. I think I'll offer him a boon, right? And they say, what do you want? You can have anything you wish for. And then the meditator will say, I want your sacred couch, or something that's really significant from the god. So these stories are really funny because they always seem to kind of be ill-motivated in some way. They're supposed to be a meditator, but they'll like trick God, and they'll win some power off of God, and then they go around causing trouble. So these stories are really funny. But that just shows you that we see this point of entering into the samadhi and then coming out of the samadhi as if it was a single moment. And this is how it's taught in the Buddha Dharma. It's taught that when you enter in to this perceptionless state in the formless realms, and then that might last for eons and eons and eons, but basically the next moment is when you come out of that and you're reborn in another realm. So consciousness doesn't go anywhere. It's just that these quantum moments go from one to the next. But that period in relationship to, let's say, another being is extremely long. But for that individual in that samadhi, it's only a single time moment. So really this is compatible if we look at the theory of relativity when we talk about there being no synchronous time in the universe. Okay? We can accept that this is something that is been theorized by Einstein himself. For example, you've got the event horizon and a black hole. And when you go past this horizon, then basically time stops. So how can it be that some point in space has stopped, but the rest of space continues on? Well, as we know, that for that individual who's on the other side of this event horizon, then time doesn't change. So when they, let's say they could return from the event horizon back to our world, then our universe will have progressed on millions and millions of years, but they remain the same age as they were before. And this is generally accepted by physicists and theoreticians, right? So we can see that this is compatible with what is taught in the Buddha Dharma. Now we have to look at it a little bit deeper. So that's in terms of the first foundational vehicles that sees outer matter to be real and made out of quantum particles, and then mind to be made out of quantum time moments of consciousness. Now, as soon as we hit the Chittamatra, this is the mind-only school, and the mind-only school is associated with the Eastern traditions, so Zen, right? There's Chinese Buddhism, Korean Buddhism, etc. And then they believe that there aren't outer reference, that these outer material objects do not exist. And so there is only mind. And so in that kind of tenet, in terms of that philosophical position, then it's easier to understand how a mind can progress from one moment to the other, because it's only about how things appear to you subjectively. So it's not as if, in this case anyway, it's not as if the mind is sort of empty and persists during deep sleep or during these other states, and then consciousness blanks out for a while and comes back. It's that in terms of perception, then the mind goes from one point to the other. Now, and this is also related to Matilda's question here, which is about this kind of reincarnation. So I'm just going to skip ahead to that momentarily. So in terms of reincarnation, what happens? Well, it's the same. You've got a moment of consciousness. Now, let's say it's this, you've created the karma of no reprieve. That means that you have no intermediary state. As soon as you die, then you pass to the next life. There's a special type of karma. And for example, the Buddha's cousin, who was an enemy of the Buddha, created these 5 kind of negative karmas that have no reprieve. So they're really serious, and there's no kind of intermediary state. You just go straight to hell or something like that. And so what would happen is is that upon dying, there's the last moment of consciousness, and then upon rebirth, in the hell realms, for example, there's the next moment of consciousness, and they are basically one following the other. So it's not like there's a gap between those. So as you can see here in this question, it seems as if when we're asleep, we assume that there's a gap when mind doesn't exist, and it is called a mindless state. Actually, semme in Tibetan, the term is actually mindless, and that comes from the Sanskrit. So that's how it was taught originally. But it's not like that persists. It's one time moment to the next. It's about, as for example, when we're reincarnated, this final moment of consciousness, and then when we're reborn, the next moment of consciousness. Of course, as I said in the video on the 6 bardos, then there's this bardo where we go in between lives and we experience various things. That's what most people do, and it's roughly 49 days, but it could be only a few minutes, and also depends on the type of animal. You know, certain animals will have a very shorter period of this bardo, etc. It's not definite, it's just generally 49 days. And so we die, and then we have our first experience of the moment of the bardo arising, and then we go through the bardo, and then we leave the bardo, and then reborn in the human realm or the God realm, wherever we're going to be reborn. So now, in terms of what happens in rebirth, then this consciousness in the bardo and gets separated from the body. And once it's separated from the body, then a kind of characteristic changes of consciousness, because it's no longer obstructed by material things. When you're associated with the body, then you have this kind of ignorance or this obscuration that arises out of the womb. So when you're born, then you're born into a form, and you have this kind of womb obscuration. So it's being brought into a physical form, then you become obscured. It means you don't have clairvoyance, basically. And so what is taught is that this unbridled mind or consciousness is unobstructed when it's not associated with the body, but being part of a body, it's obstructed. So you pass away, you enter the bardo, and then you have very different type of experience, because you're kind of clairvoyant. You can see what's going on through walls, you can perceive the emotions and the kind of reactions of your family members, especially people who are close to you. So this is, as I said in another video, that's why it's so important when somebody dies, is to remain calm and have a positive outlook, because the bardo being can read their family's minds, right? They know what's going on. They're very sensitive. They're not obstructed. So let's just go back to BJ's question before we talk any more about reincarnation. So he says, is there any way to practice with sleep? Well, yes. We have these things called the 6 yogas of Naropa, and one of them is the clear light practice. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's clear light practice, and we also have dream practice. So there's a dream practice, and there's a clear light practice, and the clear light practice is the practice of sleep. And I won't go into any great detail about this, because in general, then these 6 yogas of Naropa are something that's only taught in a strict retreat environment, so an enclosed retreat environment, and they're secret practices. But there's a lot of general information about this practice that most people know, and I know that lots of people teach this publicly, and even you will find the instructions online. But traditionally, then that's seen to be very due. It's dangerous for the individual who's practicing, but it's also, in general, it's negative for the tradition itself, because it's the cause for this tradition to kind of decline when it comes commonplace, and people kind of teach it willy-nilly, then it gets watered down, it no longer seems important. But anyway, the general idea is that we aren't able to be aware of the time of sleep. And that's because nothing is arising to our awareness. Again, I will have to emphasize that the way this is taught in the Hindu tradition is totally different. Because in the Hindu tradition, then what they believe is that you can have awareness of or consciousness during sleep. And so it's a very different position, but we don't say that, right? Because for us, consciousness is about things that arise to sense perceptions, whatever those be, any of these 6 sense perceptions. And when they are not there, then there's no consciousness. But there is this state of deep sleep, even if it's only one time moment. And the practice of clear light is to recognize that. Now the problem is you have no awareness in sleep, right? So how do you recognize it? Well, the only way you can tell if you've recognized the clear light in deep sleep is upon waking up. there are various signs. So there's these kind of signs that point out that, oh, I must have recognized the clear light in sleep. And so primarily this sleep practice is about, before you go to bed, is sort of reinforcing. What we do is we actually say prayers. May I recognize the clear light, may I recognize the clear light. And we do this through sessions intensely throughout the day, so that when we sleep, there is a chance of having this recognition, but you're not aware of the recognition and you don't remember it. It's only on reflection, on looking on the external signs when you wake up, that you might think, oh, I must have had an experience of the clear light. So again, I won't go into the details. So then this comes to in sleep like death, where everything is like zero. Well, no. So this, where everything is like zero, well, death isn't everything like zero. To start off with, in terms of the Buddha Dharma, I mean, it depends what you believe. If you think you're basically finished when you die, then I suppose so. The consciousness fizzles out. But for us, then the person who's dying doesn't realize they're dead, generally. That's why we do these bardo practices. This Tibetan Book of the Dead, then that's done for somebody who's passing away, to remind them, well, now you're passing into the bardo. Because for their experience, they feel sick, their elements dissolve. It's a bit like going to sleep. And then when they just hit that point where normally we go into sleep, they pass into the bardo. And they sort of don't realize they're dead. That's what it's taught. They don't realize they're dead. They just think, why is everybody sitting around? Because they're sitting around the body and they're kind of aware of what's going on. And the problem is then the mind becomes untethered. It's not attached to a body or a form. And so if I think about, oh, I haven't been to Nepal in over a year. And then what happens is I just travel there immediately, because I just go wherever my mind goes. And because we haven't controlled our minds, then we're like a leaf in the wind. This is the reason why it's so important to stabilize your mind through your meditation in your life now. Because when you come to that point of death, you need to have stability. Otherwise, and this is what the experience most people have, is every time a thought arises, then immediately they're drawn here and there. It's a bit like when we dream, And if we think of horrible things, for example, like war, and death, and then we'll have these horrific experiences arise to us. So this is the reason why people need to pass away with a stable mind and feeling calm and peaceful, and also to be surrounded by their loved ones who are kind of not like wailing in sorrow. That's thought to be really, really bad, very negative for that person when they die. And it's because as the elements dissolve, then the mind becomes detached from the body and the brain, and it becomes, as they say, like a feather in the wind. So we have to develop this stability and habituate ourselves to it. That's the important thing. You can tell yourself, I'm about to die, I better keep calm. But if you're habituated to being kind of an anxious person and thinking about things negatively all the time, then those negativities will manifest in the bardo. So what it's taught is that when you enter the bardo, then your appearances are very similar to the life that you just left. So I'm sort of in Canada, surrounded by my friends in a hospital bed, and I pass away. And to me, it all seems normal, as if I'm still that person. The only thing is, nobody sees me and they don't talk to me. So I get kind of upset. Why are you ignoring me? That's the way they explain it. Because you're dead to them, but to you, you're not dead. And then as the bardo progresses, then you start to transform into the life you're about to get. So let's say you're going to be reborn as an animal. Then you would start off, things seem normal, and your thoughts start going here, there, and everywhere, and you're kind of dragged around to this place and that place. And then slowly you kind of transform, as if in a dream, into being more like the next life. And then on the verge of the next life, then you kind of enter into the womb and are reborn. If you're going to be born through the womb, that is. I mean, there's other different ways of being born. So in terms of Matilda's question regarding reincarnation, are all beings still destined to have go-arounds without much progress in the big Kalpa scheme of things? Okay, so I have issue with the word destined in general. We use this word destined, destiny, sort of fate, etc. But in the Buddha Dharma, it's about karma. And they're very different, fate and karma. So the important thing to understand is that everything depends on how you act here and now. In fact, that's all we have. And this really is a key point regarding the previous question about consciousness and about Matilda's question about how are we going to go about samsara, how are we going to experience the world. Now, again, when we think about it logically, it seems as if when we enter sleep, we're unconscious, and then there's this time that's lost. Where did mind go to? And as I said again, Buddha Dharma is about subjective experience. So you have this subjective world, right? And that subjective world, to us, then we impute a lot upon it. We create a kind of story, right? What exists for us is the present, discrete moment of consciousness. Now, there's a slight problem because these moments move very quickly, right? From one to the next, things are continually changing. But really all we have is the present moment. Now, in every way we relate to our world and our experiences, then we extrapolate on that present moment, right? We connect it to previous moments and we kind of guess at what the future moments are going to hold, and then we string it out. We create it into a kind of continuum. And this is imputation. So this is also related to a question that's come up here. What's the difference between mind and conceptual thinking? Well, this is the realm of conceptual thinking. It's what we call thoroughly imputed. Basically, it's a story. We have our direct experience, and then we have memory, right? We relate to previous events. We have aspirations for the future. You know, I know I've got to talk to my mom's doctor this afternoon. And so we kind of connect all those things together and make a reality that doesn't exist. But what we have is the present moment of consciousness. And that is our subjective experience. So in terms of the present moment of consciousness, then there is no I will lose mind this evening when I go to sleep, or last night when I was asleep. There's only what we experience. And in terms of experience, we go from the moment of death to erasing the bardo, or directly into being born somewhere. Or we go from the moment of falling asleep, moment of waking up. That's just an analogy, right? Because obviously there could be different moments in between that. And then when it comes to our meditation, it's similar, right? We're asked that we need to kind of keep focused on an object like a candle or a statue of the Buddha. And to us, then we seem to think that there's this persistent experience that happens in our meditation. But in reality, all we have is the only thing that really arises to us is this presence. Now, in general, then Western teachers, you hear them explain how you should meditate. They say, well, you don't need to do anything. You just need to rest in the present moment. Yes, well, that's true. That's what it's taught in the texts. Problem is, we have no idea what the present moment is. That's because we only live within this framework of kind of extrapolating our existence into past and future moments. And in reality, in order to understand presence, we have to understand what the present moment is. And that present moment itself is also not substantial. So as you see, that this is not a simple question. And how we get there, essentially, is we get there through practice. And so in terms of Matilda's question, then how is it we are destined, or what we're destined to experience, depends only upon our frame of mind. It depends upon how we are in the moment. And how we are in the moment is conditioned by countless eons and lifetimes of negativity. There's some good things there as well, but we've done all kinds of stuff, right? But we very easily get drawn away by things. We become addicted to things very easily. We develop likes and dislikes very easily. And so the more that we compound these things, then the more hopeless our situation appears to become. But it's not hopeless. Because essentially, if we're able to get to the source, let's say we could, it's really difficult, right? It's not just a matter of just let go, you'll be fine. Because we can't let go. We immediately, react to things. But if you could, if you had an epiphany moment, then you could awaken in a single instant. I mean, it's possible, right? Significant beings do that. In general, then we have to practice really hard, but it is possible. So there's no reason why we can't find liberation right now. The problem is that we have so many afflictions and obscurations, and they're self-made. It's our habituation. It's our preference that has brought these things on. and these obscure us. So then this comes down to this question, I think, is a little bit later, is what's the difference between conceptual thinking and mind? So this is the analogy, right? This is the way it's taught. So mind is like a perfect, shining crystal, right? Flawless. And this crystal, you could say, is either kind of wrapped in filth or dirt and mud. And we just have to clean that mud off. So it's this crystal itself, which is called the Buddha nature, doesn't need to be changed, doesn't need to be developed. There's nothing we need to do with that. What we have to do is we have to remove this coating of filth. And so when you look at the ancient texts, then there's all kinds of different, analogies used to refer to it. For example, a golden Buddha statue wrapped in filthy rags, etc. This kind of thing. And so it's difficult because for us, it seems as if the spiritual path is so difficult, right? It's like it takes kalpas and kalpas and kalpas and countless eons in order to become enlightened. And I think this is especially difficult in the West because we have this strong feeling that this is the only life. So we think, well, this is the only chance I've got. That's our sort of natural way of thinking. And then we think, well, I've got to do like 200 million of these before I could become a bodhisattva or a Buddha. Well, it's going to take forever. But somebody who has the kind of natural belief that people had in ancient India, then that's not a problem. Because for them, they very much saw everything to have been eternal anyway. It's like we've already had countless lifetimes, In fact, from now until Buddhahood is relatively short compared to how long we've been in samsara. So when you naturally have this belief or feeling that you've had countless lifetimes, that's going on since beginningless time, what does that mean? Well, there is no beginning. It's a continual loop and cycle, and it will continue on until you achieve awakening, right? So that eternity, that idea of the vastness of time, only exists in the concepts, in the context of our conceptual imputation, our fallacies. And once that fallacy has been removed, then you are liberated. You are no longer subject to the wheel of time. So samsara isn't like a long time. It's like a washing machine or something. It's just going around and around and around and around and around, and there's no way to get out. The way it's described in the way of the Bodhisattva is like a jar full of bees, right? The bees can only fly around in circles. So that's what we're like. And the other reason why it all depends on the current moment is because everything arises from mind. And so let's say I'm a very, very small-minded person, very angry, small-minded person, then everything I experience is negative, right? Everyone's an enemy, everything's a problem. If I go to the shops and the jar I want isn't on the right shelf, people get upset. These are small-minded, angry people. And there's other people who are really kind of easygoing and open. And so basically, even if really difficult things happen, they never see it to be a problem. There's some really challenging situation, but they'll think some solution, or they'll think positively about that. Or a difficult person, they will have compassion for them, and having compassion for them, and then they can sort of completely transform what would normally be a negative circumstance into a positive one. And so really, this is another reason why everything depends on the current moment. It all depends on your outlook, right? If you have this outlook of bodhicitta, loving kindness, compassion for all sentient beings, then it wouldn't matter how many kalpas you had to exist, because like every moment is a moment where you have the opportunity to benefit and help another. It really, really depends on what you believe in and your outlook, how you relate to things. And so someone who feels desperate, traumatized, and then, one day is a long time. My mother has a lot of health issues at the moment, and for her, it's very difficult just being alive for one day, because she kind of feels like, I wish I could die, right? But for another person in the same situation, they could be filled with joy. Somebody who has faith in Jesus Christ and being born in heaven and has been a good Christian all their life, then as they approach death, then they will approach it with open arms. It reminds me of a Bergman film called The Seventh Seal. I don't know if you've ever seen that. It's quite an old film, really excellent, one of my favorite films. But it's during the time of the plague in the medieval era. And it's quite depressing, right? Because they're all trying to run away from the plague. and there's like a knight, and there's this sort of businessman. There's different people, and they're trying to escape the plague. And one of them is this kind of pauper girl who's had a really hard life. And so they're all kind of, they're all very negative about the circumstance. But at some point in the film, and then she's expresses her feeling, and it's like she's just waiting to be welcomed or with the open arms of Jesus Christ. She was like really positive about it because she was going to meet her maker, and she had great faith. So really it depends on your outlook. And so somebody who has belief in the Buddha Dharma doesn't really see it to be a problem, this how many kalpas it's going to take to become Buddha. It's all about whether you're progressing and not getting worse. If you're headed in the right direction, that's the most positive thing. So for somebody with faith in the Buddha Dharma, then they will think, now I have met the Buddha Dharma and I'm on the sacred path, then I will find liberation. And it's kind of something that brings joy to the heart and not depression. But I understand for many Westerners, that's what they feel. They're like, what? It's going to take 3 countless eons? I could have found a more simple method than that. I heard one teacher, he said, what? I don't think I can wait 10 lifetimes. One's more difficult enough or something like that. So it just shows that they don't really have a kind of Buddhist outlook. And it's up to you if you have a Buddhist outlook or not, But as far as I can see, if this is the only life, and we're certain that's it, after this life it's over, then really you should, try to enjoy yourself while you can, because when you finish, that's it. If it is the case that we've just been born or brought into this world through random series of events, then really humanity has no meaning whatsoever. If it's all random, there's no God or there's no path to liberation, and we're just like, random events that have happened, consciousness is just an illusion, etc., then nothing has significance or meaning. I mean, people say, Elon Musk is saying we should save consciousness, but if you're a scientist and you really believe that everything is random and nothing has value, and we're just kind of like sophisticated rocks and trees and things like that, then what's the point in preserving it? The universe will eventually pass on and there will be no trace of it. It doesn't matter how long you persist with our culture and our civilization. It only makes sense if you have belief in, let's say, God in heaven, or if you have belief in multiple lives. And so in the Buddha Dharma, there's something called the highest worldly view. And this itself is not a religious or spiritual view. It's just the kind of the absolute highest view you can have in the world, and it's a necessity if you want to engage in the spiritual path. And it's called the belief in past and future lives and karma, cause and effect. Now, then we come to a problem, because as you look at the successive views, remember I said there's the Vaibhashikas and Sautantrikas, the foundational vehicle, and then this sort of middle one is the mind-only school. Well, as you progress in levels of view, and then in that, then they say then mind itself isn't real. The mind-only think mind is ultimate, and that appearances only arise to mind based on our conditioning. But in the middle way, then we don't posit the substantial existence of mind either. So both mind and matter are not seen to be substantial or real. And this final view is the one that is most compatible with modern theory on quantum physics and quantum uncertainty. But it's like a huge topic, right? Huge and difficult topic. Where or what is the dividing line between thinking mind and natural awareness? So in like in the Hindu tradition, and they see this kind of consciousness to be supreme or ultimate. There's this real thing that's called unity consciousness or God consciousness, Brahman consciousness, etc. And that's seen to be real and substantial. And it would seem in the Buddha Dharma of the Middle Way, Mahamudra Dzogchen, that we also believe in this, because we talk about this luminous clarity, this luminous nature of mind. So let's return to this analogy about the crystal. So we're saying there's this crystal, it's flawless, so it's completely transparent, and it's just been covered in filth, and we have to clean the filth away. But also if you take a crystal like that, and you put it onto a red silk, right, then the crystal itself takes on this redness, right? It appears to be made of the substance of this silk that it's on. And so in terms of awareness or mind, it's very much like that. It's this illuminating quality in terms of that it's able to take on or to express the kind of appearances to mind. And those could be forms, color, etc. Or it can be smell, or it can be sound, or it could be mental images, thoughts, etc. So mind is seen to be this kind of pure, pristine awareness. And it's called luminosity in the Mahamudra. So this is kind of clarity or awareness. And itself is unspoilt by appearances. Now, so there's appearances to mind, and these are ephemeral, right? They change. They're not stable. From moment to moment, appearances change. So whatever we perceive, then it moves. And now the other thing is that in Buddha Dharma, what we say is that mind is not able to focus on more than one appearance at a time. That's a bit difficult. So the analogy is there's a house with 5 windows, and there's a monkey inside the house. And so the monkey can look out the first window, let's say that's form, or it can look out the sound window, or it can look out the smell window, and it just moves between these different portholes. But mind is only aware of one thing at a time. And for many people, this is actually counterintuitive. They feel like, for example, I can be looking at a form, but also be thinking about the shape and the color of that form. Now, in terms of meditation, then what you have to do is you have to investigate this for yourself. It doesn't help just being told how it is. You need to, using your meditation, come to discover the truth of this. What is the difference? So there's this division, right? There's awareness itself, which is this element of knowing of something, and then there's the appearances, and the appearances are like sights and colors, shapes and smells and all this kind of stuff. There's those. And then there's what we call the thinking mind. This was the question. What is the difference between the thinking mind? Well, the thinking mind is part of the mental consciousness, right? So we've got eyes, they're the sight organs, and then we have forms that appear to the eyes. We can understand that division. And these forms and colors and things, they're taught to be non-conceptual. But also we can focus on a mental image, something we imagine, right? And we can focus on a thought, like I am hungry, right? So these are part of the mental consciousness. So there's the 5 sense consciousness, and then there's the mental consciousness. And this thought comes into this category. So as you can see here, then thought is already separate from what we call mind in terms of awareness and the objects that arise to awareness. So appearing objects and perceiving awareness are a dualistic division, right? This is a subject-object dichotomy. Now, in the ultimate level of the view, there is no separation between these two. But provisionally, we have to think of these in terms of subject and object. And in the foundational vehicle, then the outer objects are seen to be real and composed of atoms. And the mind is also real and composed of time moments, quantum time moments, and these two are in a kind of juxtaposition to each other. In the mind-only school, there is only mind, and mind projects an illusion of outer objects. But in the highest level, the middle way view, then neither mind nor external objects are seen to be real. They're merely appearing phenomena, but they have no real existence. And that's kind of more difficult to understand. But on top of it, sorry to go on, but on top of this really difficult point, what is the appearing objects and what is the appearing mind, then there is these thoughts that we have, concepts. And thoughts, in a way, are kind of even less real than things that appear to mind. Because when I perceive a color, I have a kind of reference of what I'm looking at. But when I have thoughts, then it becomes very unclear as to what that is. And in general, let's say, if I think big, right? This is a big ball, for example. Well, that's kind of relative, right? Because if let's say I have a basketball, and I think that's big compared to a tennis ball. And the tennis ball is big compared to a golf ball, right? But the tennis ball, I say, is big because it's bigger than the golf ball, but it's smaller than the basketball. So that existence of big is relative. And this is the area of concepts. So this is called what is called thoroughly imputed. So in terms of the Eastern tradition, then we have something called the 3 natures. This is important. Three natures. There's the thoroughly imputed nature, there's the other dependent nature, and there is what's called Yungdrung. So Yungdrung means the ultimate. Yungdrung actually is the word for swastika in Tibetan, and I was talking about this on a recent podcast. So there's the ultimate, there is this other dependent, and there is this imputed. Now the ultimate is the way things really are, and this is what we could call, let's just use modern theory, this is quantum reality. Quantum reality is just a theory, right? But we can loosely understand it to be that, because we understand how the ultimate reality is non-dualistic and is not fixed. And so we'll just use this as something to hang our hat on. We can say, let's say that's a quantum reality. And then other dependent, what's that? Well, remember, we think of matter as being composed of atoms, right? Scientists accept that, and Buddhists accept that, so we've got this matter. Now the matter is made up of lots of different particles are bound together. So this, let's say this tennis ball, its existence is dependent upon these atoms, right? So it's other dependent, and because of that, the tennis ball isn't substantial or real. That means it can be, it can decay, it can be broken down over time. It's impermanent, it's always changing. So it never becomes or remains a kind of consistent or substantial item for any moment of time. It's just continually changing. So in that terms, it's not real, but it's made out of substantial particles. And then there's the thoroughly imputed. And the thoroughly imputed is, this is big, this is good, this is bad. It's our thoughts, right? Now, gets even more difficult. So we go back to this idea about consciousness. Consciousness moving from one moment to the next. And in sleep, then we don't have anything happening in between. It's like this sleep period for us is one moment of consciousness, because subjectively we only experience going to sleep and then waking up. And as I said, then we have this experience of, the only real experience, ultimate experience, is the present moment. And so all other, the way we conceive our world, for example, I am going westwards, is in terms of kind of extrapolating or expanding on what we really experience, which is the present moment. Okay? You're with me, right? That's not too hard to understand. Now, in terms of thoughts, for example, I am going to town today, right? We see that to be a discrete thought, right? I'm going to town today. We see that to be an entity. Now, in the actual thinking process itself, there is no one point where that thought exists as a whole. Do you understand? For example, I does not exist. Am going to town today. None of those elements of that thought exist in a single moment, present moment. And the finer you dissect moments, then you find that even the concept of I, am, even the concept of the letter A and the letter M, however much we break it down, then that thought loses its identity. And in the present moment awareness, there is no such thing as a constructed or mental construct. You're with me on that, aren't you? And that's what we mean by thoroughly imputed. It's only imputed. So how do we relate to a thought? Well, we relate to it, it's in a relative manner, in the present moment. And all our experience is based on that. But what is taught in the Buddha Dharma is, although we have these appearances, we believe, we experience things, what we're experiencing is ultimately only this present moment of awareness, which is what we call mind. And it's pristine and unstained. It's this crystal or this jewel. It has no characteristics. Remember, there's the three turning of the wheels of Dharma. The first one is Four Noble Truths, truth of suffering, and there's no self. The second one is emptiness and bodhicitta. And the third turning the wheel of Dharma, this highest level of teachings, the most difficult to comprehend, is the teachings on signlessness. And so, when we try to perceive or understand the present moment, we are blocked. And the reason why we're blocked is because of our conceptualization. Because with that, in trying to access presence, we bring along with us all our conceptual garbage and baggage. That itself has nothing to do with what is called awareness or presence. But this awareness is persistent, unchanging and pure. So in general, in the Buddha Dharma, we say, what are you talking about? You know, unchanging, pure, persistent? That's non-Dharma talk. Well, it's true, because we say in the Buddha Dharma, depending on the level of view, that there is no self, there is no purity, there, etc., 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 etc. But in the third turning of the Buddha Dharma, then we talk about this perfectly pure, unchanging element that is the ultimate truth. And this is what we call mind, or awareness. But as you see, it cannot itself be associated with any temporary or ephemeral phenomena. Ephemeral, temporary, changing phenomena themselves only exist in terms of, or in the context of, concepts of fabrication. Now, whether or not any of that makes sense to you very much depends upon your own practice and also your own level of study. And that could be study associated with Western philosophy, it can be study associated with Eastern philosophy. There are many different avenues to come to understand this. And one of these avenues is, quite frankly, the love of Jesus. And why is that? Because someone who has this profound and deep love and faith in Jesus lets go of all clinging, right? They're completely open to this notion of God and acceptance of God, and they're able to let go into that. And what they let go into is this space of primordial awareness, this pure primordial awareness. So let's see if we can get on to any more questions here regarding reincarnation. Are all beings still destined? Okay, we don't believe in destiny. Destiny is now. What you do now is how you will experience things. This is the most important thing. And so your job, your goal is to be in the present moment. What does that mean? Well, you've got to remove these layers of filth, misconceptions, negativities, and apply yourself to virtue. And in that, and hopefully you will uncover this primordially pure nature of mind, or essentially what we say is to recognize the nature of mind. And once you've done that, then you're not going to have problems with eons and eons, because you'll already have seen the point. That's about as best we can do. I mean, if we could remove all our conceptual clinging and identity and everything associated with our fallacies, then we would be liberated. But it's not easy, right? The way people teach it is you don't need to practice, you don't need to study, all you need to do is rest in the present moment. You try it. You sit down right now, rest in the present moment. Does it change you? Does it stop you from associating with concepts and fallacies? No, because it's not a simple matter of doing that. What we have to do is remove these thick layers of mud that are obscuring this, what is called this crystal, right? It's a one-dimensional crystal, you could say. You can define it in many ways, but you have to discover that in your own mind. You have to discover that. It's strange to say you need to discover it in your mind. You don't need to. It is the persistent reality that is unborn and unchanging, and it doesn't need to be developed or uncovered or discovered. It's just the way things are. But the problem is we don't see things for the way things are. If you ask somebody a question about what is a thought, and they'll say, oh, it's a sensation. What's a sensation? Oh, it's like an energy. What's energy? It's like, it's like a feeling. And we just go around in circles trying to grasp at our experience through concepts. And what meditation is supposed to do is to allow us just to let go into what's called the expanse of all phenomena, this sort of dharma dhatu. But again, it sounds very simple. You sit down for 5 minutes and immediately the mind's trying to create a story, right? It won't let you rest. It won't let you rest in the present. We don't even understand what the present is. Okay. Where or what is the dividing line between our thinking and mental? Okay, we did that. Do you have any advice regarding the development of intuition and persistence? Well, for intuition, then I will say that that's very associated with insight. And for me, then the best way to develop intuition and insight is by direct observation. But that's not always the case. For most people, then we need kind of analogies, we need metaphors. And what we do is, in general, is we engage in methods. So there's method and wisdom. And wisdom itself is this intuition. And we need some kind of access for that. But as it's taught in the Buddha Dharma, there's 84,000 different types of methods or teachings to overcome the 84,000 different types of obscurations, right? Well, basically it means it's a different type of method for every person, because everybody's a little bit different. And you have to find the thing that's going to be the most useful trigger for you. And so for some people, for example, people who have very strong clinging to reality, then they need a God, basically. For some people who they need something that they can hang their faith on, and they need a God because they come into problems, right? Where did the universe come from? And then it gets very complicated. And if you can say, God created the universe, just give everything to God and you'll be fine. And then with that, they can kind of progress in terms of removing clinging. As I say over and over again, the whole purpose of the Dharma is to remove clinging. And you have to do that in stages, right? So for somebody who's got difficulty with these complex philosophical topics, then for them to be able to refer everything to God is going to help them go a long way in letting go, and letting go of clinging, and opening up, and creating this spaciousness of mind. But for other people, then when you tell them God created the universe, then they're very intellectual, and they will say, well, really? Well, where did God come from? So immediately they come up to another kind of boundary or border there. And so you have to find a kind of more profound or more efficacious means in order to help them let go of their clinging. And sometimes for people who are very intellectual, then you have to use quite extreme methods. If you look at the story of Tilopa and Naropa, for example, then there seems to be no more extreme methods than that. And they don't seem to be related to the Buddha Dharma in any way. In fact, they seem to be engaging in negativity 24 hours a day. You know, it's really quite horrible. But you have to understand that Naropa was an incredibly learned Pandita, somebody who had sort of memorized volumes and volumes of scriptures and knew the entire Sutra, Paramitriana, studied the Tantras. And so he came to understanding all the words of the Buddha Dharma. And the story goes that he was visited by kind of a spirit or an ogress or something like that, an old woman basically, and said to him, well, you're very learned in the words, but you don't know the meaning. And with that, he was like, what? What do you mean I don't know the meaning? And she said, well, you're going to have to find your teacher, Tilopa, if you want to come to understand that. And so he didn't think, oh, what are you talking about, old woman? I'm very learned. You know, he was looking for the answers, and he could see that there were problems there. And so he immediately left everything and went in search of his teacher. And when he met Tilopa, Tilopa didn't teach him scriptures. He didn't teach him, you know, to pray to God. He just was horrible to him. And the reason why is to break down his final obscurations, which are these sort of complex kind of conceptual clinging to reality. And in the end, it worked. And how did Tilopa cause Naropa to gain realization? Well, he slapped him in the head with a shoe. You know, so anyway, yeah. So in terms of intuition, then here's something. We don't always understand when we're developing insight. But intuition is a very good word. So I would say initially there's intuition, and then that develops into insight, and then into wisdom. And intuition is getting a natural feel for how things are. So for example, if you are meditating and your teacher says, could you meditate today? And you say, no, I tried to meditate, but I had too many thoughts. And the teacher would say, really? Well, how many thoughts did you have? I don't know, there were lots. Okay, I want you to sit down and meditate, and when the thoughts come up, I want you to count them. Something like that. It's a silly example. And so what happens for that meditator, as they're sitting in meditation, and then a thought comes up, and normally they might try to say, oh, I mustn't think, I've got to focus on my object. And what did teachers say? Oh, to count the thoughts. And so what they do is they'll look to see how many thoughts there are. Well, as soon as we realize that, as soon as we look and we realize how many thoughts there are, then they kind of disappear. What they do is they lose their substantial nature. At first, the thought feels like something very solid that's blocking our meditation, right? And then we actually investigate. So this is what I call direct perception, looking at things for what they are. And we come to see that they run away from us. Our initial feeling is like there was a thought, but it went. So at first, we don't understand what's going on. We don't understand how it is that a thought can seem so real. I have a very strong visual image, but when I investigate, it seems to become blurry or it seems to disappear. We don't understand that. We don't have insight. But our intuition changes. So our intuition becomes, it's not to take them that seriously. We no longer feel these things to be so substantial. Initially, like a feeling of, I'm afraid might arise. or I'm worried, something like that, meditation. So that feeling will kind of be very overbearing on us, like a kind of demon that won't let us alone. But when we investigate what feelings are, what we find is, well, we can't really perceive them or even define them. And by persisting with this over time, we develop this intuition. And that intuition is just a natural feeling that these things aren't so solid as we thought they were. Now, insight itself, or wisdom, is when we come to understand the way things are, especially if we recognize. Then we come to understand that, yes, although this appears to happen, the reality is this. And once we have certainty in that, then that becomes our meditation itself. That recognition becomes our meditation itself. Now, in terms of persistence, then that's what we would call, persistence is what we call diligence. And in the Buddha Dharma, the Tibetan language, diligence is like joyous effort. So there's a problem in general in the West, and that's because we kind of think like we have to force ourselves to do something. Diligence is like, sort of whipping ourselves or something like that, or forcing ourselves not to sleep. It's not like that. This tsundru, it means kind of joyous enthusiasm, is where we kind of see the point of what we're doing. And through that, then we can apply ourselves easily. We find it easy. Like, for example, if you've got a movie that you're really interested in, or like sports, right? Okay, we'll use sports because loads of people like sport, right? Especially like, football, or what you call soccer. And then there's like millions of people all around the world. And it's like you would never have to force them to watch a football game. And why is that? It's because they have this enthusiasm, right? This interest. And so ultimately what we need to do is, in order to have persistence, then we have to have this enthusiasm. And that enthusiasm comes from seeing the point of what we're doing. And it's really difficult for a lot of spiritual practitioners. And that's because initially, when you start meditating, you get these temporary benefits. And you think, wow, that felt really good. I could do a bit of yoga. Oh, I'm so relaxed. And then we have this enthusiasm. But as our practice develops, we hit this kind of plateau. I like to call it a sort of plateau. Really, it's not a plateau. It's just that the kind of progress is very incremental. It's a slow slope. The grade is very low. At first, it seems significant because we were like children, right? It's like when a child learns the ABCs, it seems really significant. But when you go to university, like, it's laughable, right? The ABCs are nothing. So at first, it seems really significant. And then we hit this plateau. And it seems like we're not getting anywhere. And this is a real problem. And it's one of the main reasons why people lose kind of their enthusiasm for the Dharma. And they never develop this persistence. Part of the reason for that is because they're kind of going down the wrong track. For example, they see the goal of their meditation just to be a consequence of meditation. What do I mean by that? Well, I meditate, and then I get this feeling of bliss, and I go, oh, that bliss is the thing I'm looking for. That bliss is the goal. That's the nature of mind, or that's the Brahma consciousness. And then we objectivize that bliss, and we chase after it. And the problem is that bliss isn't the goal. That bliss is just a side effect. It's a consequence of meditating. So what we need to do is persist in those methods that are bringing insight, and along with insight, then bliss arises. So what it's taught is that when you meditate and you have nice experiences, is just to go, oh, okay, just make a note and forget about it. Don't cling to it. Don't see it to be important. But I meet a lot of people who have had these kind of feelings of well-being in their meditation, and they're almost 100% convinced that that's what they're supposed to be developing or cultivating. And all of them hit a brick wall eventually. So you have to avoid that. Now, how are you going to develop this kind of understanding or certainty? Well, as I said before, then there's three things you need to do. There's study, contemplation, and meditation. That's your goal. Study, we often discard in the West too early. It's really important. And don't be fooled just because the context of this ancient scripture is old-fashioned, that what it's teaching is old-fashioned. It's just the analogies and metaphors of their time were different, right? For example, we've got these 7 points of the chariot that's used to analyze the middle way. And we think, well, chariot? They had that in ancient Rome. What's that got to do with modern now? It's not about the chariot, right? It's just a technique. You could take the 7 points of the motor car. It doesn't make any difference. Or the iPhone. It's the same. And this is the problem. We tend to see it and we think, well, that's old-fashioned. And the other thing is we don't like keeping vows. So we think, oh, that's what they used to do in the olden days. That's funny, people who shave their heads, that sort of thing. And we kind of reject this. But really, this branch of study is really important. And you have to have all three. So study is to look at the words until you understand what they're talking about. So if you immediately reject it, then you won't get to that point. Study is to look at the words until you don't really have doubts of what's being said. Contemplation is then when you make it personal. So then you take that meaning and then you investigate for yourself. And you sort of ask questions. Well, I'm not sure about what that means. And you look into it yourself and develop this personal understanding. And then eventually there's meditation. And meditation is once you have certainty, then you rest in that certainty. And that's what brings the results. So what happens in our meditation is we never get to this third point of actually meditating on certainty. What we have is a lot of doubt and methods. We've got methods. Look at a candle. Okay, I'm looking at a candle. What's that all about? So all we have is the outer method without understanding it, without contemplating why we're doing that. And so we certainly don't have meditation. Meditation has to have certainty. And these three are associated with understanding, experience, and realization. Understanding comes from study, and then once you contemplate, or you make that personal in your own practice, then you give rise to experiences. Experiences when the truth of that thing that you've studied and understood becomes apparent to you in your own field of perception. And this is associated with developing intuition. And once you've developed intuition and insight, oh, I see how it is, then you can meditate, because you've got something to meditate on. You've got the certainty to meditate on. Good evening from Cologne. Hello, Cologne, Germany. How are you doing? Tashi Delek. You know, I've been to Cologne quite a lot. When I was a musician, we used to play there. There was a little nightclub just under the Cologne Cathedral, actually. I quite like Germany in general. Tashi Delek. Okay. How do you know when you wanted to become a monk? I offer merit. Yeah, so I never really had any intention to become a monk. In my life. I remember when I was younger, I had this strange feeling that I would either become a soldier or a monk. And I think that must be something to do with past lives. I must have been like a monk or something in the past, because actually monks and soldiers are very similar. They all say this. The way they live, you know, it's like barracks almost, and everybody pulls together. Like if you need to move, like we had to move this huge Buddha statue, you know, it weighed like unbelievable, more than a ton. And all we had is people to carry it upstairs and things. But if you get enough people pushing together, right, then you can lift the thing. And it all depends on you all chipping in. For example, we were lifting this massive statue to put into the new temple at Sekar. And basically, if one or two people sort of didn't pull their weight, then you're in danger of the whole thing collapsing. And so you all have to pitch in and really try hard. And it's very similar in the army. I imagine, you know, you're sort of all like brothers and you all work together. And also the kind of interactions in the community is very similar. Communal kitchens. Of course, what they do outwardly is very different, but they often say. So I never had this feeling that I wanted to become a monk or become a soldier, because I was always been a kind of quite a strong pacifist and things like that. But having gone into a retreat to start off with, then we had to take robes. It was part of the process of doing a 4-year retreat. Then we would take monastic robes and also vows, temporary vows. Really, this tradition of temporary vows isn't authentic. It's something we do in the West. But the Karmapa said that the retreatants themselves were equivalent to gelongs. So gelong is the mendicant, the fully, you know, with full vows. And so I went into retreat, and then about halfway through the retreat, we had a series of teachings on something called the 3 vows. It's a text by Jamgon Kongtrul, and it covers the vows from the Hinayana, Mahayana to the Vajrayana vows. Of course, these vows are all very different, right? And part of that was this commitment that you could only take these teachings if you were going to become a monastic. And at that time, being in retreat, my enthusiasm for the teachings and the Dharma was so high that I made a commitment to take vows. So it was basically, well, if you're going to take these teachings, you either have to be a monk or you have to be committed to taking vows as soon as you can. And so as soon as I came out of the 4-year retreat, I traveled to India. I actually arranged a vow ceremony for a bunch of Westerners from the United Kingdom. And we all went together and took our vows. And so that was like 2014, I guess. So 9 years ago or something. Yeah, is it? 2014, something, yeah. Or no, 10 years ago now. And then after that, I went straight into the retreat in Nepal. Basically, almost everybody there is a monastic now. Almost everybody there is a monastic. And so it felt kind of natural and very comfortable. And you know what? I see the kind of benefits of it for practice, for sure. Life becomes very simple. It becomes very easy, you know, to practice when you haven't got all these kind of complications with worldly life. It's really beneficial. Oh, hello from Brooklyn. I really like New York, actually. My aunt lives there, or she used to. What are your thoughts about the relationship between Yama and Gnostic demigure? So I used to be really into Gnosticism. We know this Gnosis kind of means knowledge, right? And it's the foundations of the Christian religion, really. And this kind of what they're called desert fathers. So in the Orthodox tradition, then they still see the Gnostic fathers to be very important. The interesting thing is that Christianity became adopted by the Holy Roman Empire. And so what they wanted to do is they wanted to systematize it. And at that time, there was a lot of differently held beliefs between the different sects. And so that's it was quite difficult. And the empire wanted to consolidate their power. So they had something, I believe it was called the Council of Nicaea, where they brought everybody together and they wanted to draft the sort of official Christian position. But it was done under duress. So basically they said, you know, if we don't have an agreement that everybody agrees to before we leave, then you're going to be put to death. So that was kind of how Christianity started. But before that, it was based on this Gnostic sects. And they would live in the desert, for example, like hermits, you know, very much like the Buddhist monks at that time were living. So it's quite a deep and interesting topic. Now, I'm not exactly sure the question you're asking about Yama. So we'd say Yama is like the Lord of Death and also demigure. Big battle, baddie. The big baddie holding samsara wheel. Okay, Yama is the big baddie holding the samsaric wheel. So Yama is the Lord of Death. But death is more like a principle, right? So you often see this picture with this demon with its teeth sinking into a wheel, and it shows the 6 realms of samsara. So what's interesting here is that we put this on the door of the kind of yoga hall or the monastery traditionally in Buddha Dharma. And it's to remind people about this, you know, jar of bees, right? This wheel, this washing machine that we're stuck in, that we can't get out of. And that in order to get out of that, we have to practice the Buddha Dharma. And so there's a big difference here, because we see this, when we see this, it just seems like some kind of medieval painting or something, you know, kind of this sort of deathly imagery. But when you get these Tibetans and Nepalis from the mountains who have faith in the Buddha Dharma, when they go up to the temple door and they see this picture of the wheel of samsara with the Lord of Death biting down on it, what they think is, oh, I better behave myself, otherwise I'm going to be born in hell. Right? So it motivates them towards virtue. And, you know, naturally we're all human beings and we engage in all kinds of negativities. But I have to say that this really, really, really significantly influences the way that the Tibetans conduct themselves. And so, for example, there's many markets in India, right? And so you get many of them are Tibetans and many of them are Indians. And the Tibetans will not just outright cheat you. They won't give you a really, really low price. But what they'll do is when you ask them, they'll give you a fair price, and they might go down a little bit on that. But they're kind of quite solid businessmen and businesswomen, but they won't cheat you. And if you go to the Indian guy and you ask him for something, so if I've got a bell, let's say a bell, I want to buy a bell, and then the Tibetan will say, oh, that's going to be 750 rupees. You go to the Indian guy, he'll say, that'll be 1,000,000 rupees. You know, he'll say something really completely ridiculous just on the chance that they can con you out of a lot of money because you're a tourist. But the Tibetans will never do that. That's because they're lamas. They say, well, you better not cheat people or you're going to end up in hell. So it has a positive influence on their life, right? But again, if you have a very low level of view, then you kind of believe that there's heaven and hell and that you're going to be punished if you don't do this and that. But the higher levels of view, then it teaches there is no good or bad. There's a big difference between those two teachings. But what you have to understand is that there is, in essence, there's no difference in between those teachings. It's just being pitched in a different way to be appropriate for a certain type of individual, as I said. So, you know, we've got people who are very kind of mathematical and scientific, and you've got to talk to them in that way to talk about reality. For example, you say, well, is this table solid? And they will say, no, it's made out of atoms, right? So they can understand the emptiness of that table from a perspective that's in harmony with science. But some poor villager from the middle of nowhere isn't going to know what you're talking about. So you have to say, if I take an axe and I chop it up into little pieces, what will happen? It will eventually be dust. Right? The end result is the same, but it has to be presented in a different way. So for somebody who has a kind of a profound understanding of quantum physics, then you can talk about the fact that any phenomena is in superposition. It does not exist in a fixed state at any given time. And they will understand what you're talking about, right? But a layperson or somebody who hasn't studied won't. And this position about phenomena existing in superposition is really compatible with the Buddha Dharma. So anyway, I could go on and on and on and on forever, but we just don't have that much time. Hello Lama, are you able to tell which of your bhumis are opened? Okay, so this bhumis, so we've got the Bodhisattva bhumis, right? These are the 10 levels, right? The 10 levels, and the first Bodhisattva bhumi is the path of insight. And before that, you've got the path of accumulation and the path of joining. And those are the levels of ordinary bodhisattvas. So in order to, let's say, have your bhumis opened, or to be on the bhumis, then you have to be on the path of insight, first bodhisattva bhumi. And so are you able to tell which of your bhumis are opened? In that context, none of my bhumis are opened. I am not on the path of insight. That's 100% sure. Because when you reach the path of insight, then you are able to manifest 100 bodies in 100 realms simultaneously. And I can't do that, along with other things. For example, there's all kinds of super cognitive powers, and everything is laid out very, very clearly. You just look at the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama says, I am on the third level of the path of accumulation. And is he saying that just out of random faith? No, he's saying it out of his knowing exactly what is taught to be the third level of the path of accumulation. On the third level of the path of accumulation, you have real experiences of emptiness. Not just vague feelings of letting go, real experiences of emptiness in your meditation. And so he, by that and other factors, then he can place himself very clearly on the paths and levels. And this is one of the systems of teaching the Buddha Dharma. It's called the vast conduct. And in that, what they do is they teach about what happens at each stage of the Buddha Dharma in great detail. And this presentation remains pretty similar, or almost exactly the same throughout centuries and centuries. So we can see it's really authentic teaching. And so one of the reasons why we study that is so that you can identify where you are. And for most of us in the West, and we really don't know what's being taught, what's being taught, what is being explained. Somebody says the path of accumulation, we don't know what's associated with that. Well, there's two specific reasons to have entered the path of accumulation if you study the text. So then what Westerners say is, well, I've been meditating for 7 years. I must be on the path of accumulation by now. But that's just kind of like guessing, right? Don't know what the path of accumulation is, but I assume if I put this much effort into it, I must be there already. And that's a completely mistaken way of thinking about the Buddha Dharma, right? Somebody could spend 1 week meditating and reach the path of accumulation, and 99.99999% of people will spend all their lives meditating and will never reach the path of accumulation. And although we think the path of accumulation, which is 2 levels below the first bhumi, is sort of lower or lesser compared to ordinary human beings, I mean, they're almost like holy beings. They're saints. Somebody on the path of accumulation is basically a saint. And I ain't no saint. I'm an ordinary being. What I have on my side to benefit me, basically, is that I have what's called recognition. And to me, that's incredibly valuable, but other people will see that as being insignificant. But you have to understand what it means to understand what the value of that is and how that can be of benefit to you. But the main point here is, even with that, then you have to dedicate yourself really, really sincerely if you want to make progress. It's only a starting point. It's not the end. We think in the West that realization, once you have realization, you realize something, what we think is realize, I understand, then that's the end of the journey. Well, it's not. Even once you have realization, that's the first bodhisattva bhumi, then you've got, 9 other levels to progress in. You've got a hell of a lot of work to do. And, for a really capable individual, that's said to take something like an eon, right? Once you've reached the path of insight, the first bodhisattva bhumi. So we have to be realistic, right? But again, as Matilda was saying, it's not a cause to be despondent or to give up hope. It's a cause to give rise to joy. Once you're on the path, then that's a cause for giving rise to supreme joy. And that's often what we miss. Because until you're on the path, then you're just destined to have the worst kind of experiences you can imagine. And things to get really, really bad and sometimes be good and just be turned around in this washing machine of samsara. But once you're on the path, and especially if you meet a kind of authentic teacher, or if you make an authentic connection with the Dharma, then that path is a joyous path. It's one that goes from strength to strength. And so at this point, then we'll leave it there. And let's just make this aspiration that all beings enter the path of the sublime Dharma. And in doing so, are sent in the direction of final awakening and liberation from samsara. So until the next time, and then thank you very much for joining me, and I'll see you later.